I'm a citizen, and I live in Oxford County, and it's become apparent that the MOE is not going to protect us. And I just wondered, all the groups joining together now, I just wondered, what do you see as the next step in terms of trying to unify? You all have the same story, you all had the same experience. Do you have ideas what you want to do together as a group to try and stop this?
Anybody would like to take that among the panel? Mike?
Or someone else? Okay. Well, I mean, you know, we thought for so long that we were alone in this, and it's unfortunate that we're no longer alone. That there are so many other communities are suffering from this as well. It's imperative that we join forces and put as much pressure as we possibly can, political pressure as we possibly can on the minister, with our MPs. We need to get petitions signed. We need to have letters written. We need to get out in front of the public, just as we are tonight. It's not enough just to have a social networking presence. You've got to be out in front of the public making presentations. You've got to get the public engaged. If we do not get the public engaged, then we won't win this fight. That's one of the big lessons we learned in the last round when we did win, is that you have to have public engagement. And now that we have so many communities that are spread out that have very similar issues, well, identical issues around fractured limestone, I think that as a combined effort, we can put far greater pressure on the province than we ever have to say, look, it's not just one seat you're worried about anymore. You've got 4, 5, 6, 7 seats that are now up for grabs in the next election. But the only way we're going to do that is if they see that there is strong public support against building landfills on fractured limestone. And once again, not as a NIMBY issue. Right? This is a real issue. This is not a NIMBY issue. And I think that the public and the politicians have to be made aware of that. And each one of us, it's incumbent upon us to get out in front of the community in our respective communities and make sure that we build that momentum moving forward, because that's the only way we're going to do this. And then eventually get an MPP, hopefully, to put forward a private members bill. Maybe we'll get lucky and Jim Bradley will do it. But that's how we get there, is we have to put forward a bill, because the MOE is not going to do it for us. You're right, they're not.
The only thing I was going to say was one word: coalition. We need to bring together all the groups in the province that are in the same situation we are. We need to share best practices and information. But we also need to get together and be politically active.
I just want to add quickly to that. I agree that the coalition is what's needed. I'm not so sure it's going to be a hard political push. In our case, the City of Ottawa had a number of concerns with the environmental assessment. The mayor of the City of Ottawa, the second largest city in Ontario, went and visited Mr. Bradley directly and presented the concerns on the table. Not one of them was addressed in the improved environmental assessment. So political pressure is what's needed, but it's going to be a lot of pressure that's needed.
All right, so it sounds like the tail you have to twist is a political one, and that's the whole game, really. Is there any role, if I can just ask a follow-up, just federally, is there any benefit to try and get a federal involvement in it? Does it slow up the process for other companies that are trying to do this? Or
actually, can I just add one thing to the previous question as well? Don't completely write off the MOE. You can't do that, right? You have to meet with as many people as you can, as often as you can, to find advocates. Right? Because those advocates inside, if you can get enough momentum as well amongst those advocates, there's a lot of people that are going to be against it, and they will never come out to your face and tell you that they're your advocate. So you're not going to know who that is, and that's why it's imperative to get in front of them and talk to them and put a human face on this issue, because they're like a doctor. They look at it and they say, oh, you know, it's NIMBY issue, or it's, you know, oh, technically we can do this. Science has proven it can work. No. You have to put a human face on it and say, no, there are real people involved in this. Thank you. Sorry. I just wanted to add that. Richard?
Oh, yes. I heard the question about whether there might be some federal angles that we might be able to use to our advantage. And that would have been a really good question 2 or 3 years ago, because that's when we actually had the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act in all its glory. And in fact, we did use it to some extent at the Richmond landfill situation at the time that the provincial EA was going through the first time. Prior to 2006, the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte had also petitioned the federal environment minister to apply the Federal Environmental Assessment Act to this proposal on the grounds it was going to adversely affect First Nation interests and lands. Fortunately, the provincial EA was rejected by the Minister of the Environment, Laurel Broughton, and that sort of put an end to using the federal process because there's no longer a landfill to deal with. Fast forward to today, some of you may know that the Stephen Harper majority repealed the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act and replaced it with a much more watered down, much less effective piece of legislation that really doesn't apply to landfills. It applies to big things, potentially like nuclear plants and radioactive waste dumps, and I do those cases too. But for the most part, this is a provincial matter. So unless you have a proponent that's stupid enough to somehow inadvertently trigger federal jurisdiction, you know, by trying to nuke fish habitat or do something else to that effect, there's really not much we can do federally. It's really a provincial/municipal fight.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to address Richard, if I may, because of your long experience with the... Oh, sorry, Jerry Augusta. I'm associated with the Carp landfill issue. Richard, the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act used to be good. And over the years, and I'm sure I'd like you to explain where it fell apart. At what time, public interest was important.
2 words, Mike Harris, go ahead.
Community interest was critical, as well as all of the environmental attributes that go with that and the socioeconomic. For us, during the terms of reference, during the EA process, environment seems to be the issue. We've whittled it down to groundwater, air, fugitive emissions, and little or no concern for the community, for any Ontario land use planning that's gone on, in our case the Carp Road Corridor Development Plan, and even no recognition of the Ottawa official plan, which deals with and has us as an expanding community with brand new homes springing up within a kilometre of this proposal. When did that fall apart, and how do we fix that?
It fell apart in 1996. When Ontarians elected Mike Harris and his cronies to Queen's Park. And I'm not being partisan, that's just what happened. And one of the first things that happened under Mike Harris's watch was a sweeping rewrite of the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act. Prior to that time, as was just pointed out, it was regarded as a fairly rigorous, fairly effective, fairly participatory process that communities could use and did use to help stop or slow down some of these unsustainable projects. I was fortunate enough when I joined SEALA in the mid-'80s, that was the heyday of environmental assessment. It was a good process, and as I mentioned earlier, if there was any concern about unresolved environmental impacts or social economic impacts, you got a hearing before an independent tribunal. Evidence was put before the tribunal under oath. You got to cross-examine, you got to present competing expert evidence, and then this independent, non-political decision maker made the final call. That's the way it should be. But I think that whole process scared some people because sometimes the answer was no. And I mentioned the Region of Halton hearing. It was a long, expensive hearing that resulted in a no to the preferred site. And so there was always some concern among less enlightened proponents that, you know, the EA process is too long, too unpredictable, too expensive, and we might get turned down. So Mike Harris, you better get in there and fix it. So that's what they did. 1996, passed Bill 76, which basically gutted the act, put into place for the first time the terms of reference mechanism. That didn't exist before, but it was put in place in 1996 to allow proponents to shape, scope, focus down an EA. So instead of doing everything, you're just doing little snippets of the puzzle. So to fix that, I think, you know, I wouldn't want to, I wouldn't advocate a return to these long hearings. Nobody benefits from a long hearing, especially in the absence of participant funding. Nobody could afford to do that. Can you imagine doing a 180-day hearing with no intervener funding? It's unbelievable. But I think we could fix EA without having to have 180-day hearings. I think we need to go back to what we had, bring some of it forward, update it. I think Dave mentioned in his little intro of me, there was passing reference to the minister's task force on environmental assessment. That was a process that was set up in 2005 by the Liberal Minister Leona Dombrowski. Some of you may remember her. And I think that process was set up partially in response to a decade's worth of concern about the adverse impacts caused by the Harris reforms to the Act. And so all of a sudden, proponents were happy because they're whipping through the process. There's no hearings. Everybody's getting an approval. Everything's great. But affected communities and individuals and farmers and First Nations say, hey, process, what process? There's no process now, so we need to swing the pendulum back. So it was that kind of backdrop or context that prompted the environment ministers to set up an expert panel of EA practitioners to come up with a game plan for bringing it back, adding some balance, making the process more effective. I was fortunate enough to be on that panel along with other EA practitioners, and in 2005, 2006, we came up with a very detailed set of recommendations, about 41 recommendations on how to fix the process. And the minister, I think we gave her more than she anticipated. And the minister thanked us very profusely for our report and implemented, I think, one recommendation. The other 40 are on the shelf. So one of the things I want to do between now and the end of this year is to put the ministry on notice again that those recommendations for reform have not been acted upon. You've never even answered them. You never even said why you're not going to do it. So basically, I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag in terms of what we're going to do, but we're going to use that pre-existing EA report, the minister's own task force report, and say, look, this is what needs to be done. You need to do it. So that's going to be a long-term process. Sometimes these law reform activities, these law reform campaigns takes a long time to see some success. We've been talking about the Environmental Bill of Rights. It took us 20 years of lobbying to get an Environmental Bill of Rights. And same with the Walkerton scenario. The safe groups like SELA and Pollution Probe and others have been arguing for safe drinking water legislation in this province since the early 1980s. It took 20 years of lobbying and people dying in Walkerton to get that new legislation in place. So when I advocate law reform, I also say you got to take the long view. That's not going to happen overnight, and it's only going to happen if we have a concerted, coordinated political, media, public campaign to put the pressure on to get the job done. So I think we have the tools, we have the information we need to fix the EA process. We just need to convince the people at Queen's Park it needs to be done now.
Hello, my name's Jim Wyszynski, and I'm the chair of Ottawa Citizens Against Pollution by Sewage. It's kind of a related theme. I was also involved with the Spring Hill Tomlinson's dump expansion proposal in south of Ottawa back in the late 80s, early 90s. And we succeeded in getting that stopped for much the same reasons that people are here. It was on cracked limestone. It was already leaking. But what we were able to do then is because I was actually, the people that lived adjacent to the dump asked me to be on the committee that the town council had established to look into this, to hold a public meeting. And I insisted that the people who lived in the area be given equal time to speak with the Tomlinson representatives. And this is something that you were referring to, not having the sufficient time. And that worked very well. In fact, it worked so well. There were 4 meetings scheduled in various parts of the township. After the first meeting, I said to the mayor, look, 95% of the people here are opposed to this, after hearing both sides. Let's not hold the other 3 meetings. But he insisted. 2,000 people had to get involved in order to get that stopped. Now, one of the outcomes of that I think you need to be aware of is that Tomlinson made agreements with the people that lived in the area that had formed this committee and swore them all to secrecy in return for whatever he gave them. I'd have no idea what. So they haven't been able to speak about this issue since. And so when Tomlinson decided he was going to blast the top 8 feet off of the last cell because he got the commission for all of Ottawa's construction waste. And I was the only person that could speak to this issue. And, I'm saying, why are you going to dynamite on top of cracked limestone? When you already have a leachate leaking out of it, it could accelerate that. And their response was, well, it could seal it too. This is the official engineering response. So this is the kind of nonsense. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much time, but there's another area here. What we've been finding and fighting this for like 10 years with regard to the sewage spreading is that like the city's response is, well, even if all of your wells got contaminated with city sewage that's being spread around, you're less than 5% of the city population, you people with rural wells. So that doesn't constitute an epidemic, you see? So there's no money for research, there's no money for investigating or even looking at this. And this is province-wide. This is coming from the Department of Health. So they won't look into this. And you are being treated as second-class citizens if you are a rural person. And the talk about Walkerton, one of the results of Walkerton, and I was there too, was that these conservation authorities were set up to ensure that municipal drinking water supplies in future would be protected. Okay? Well, and the environmental commissioner, he met with all of the chairs and said, congratulated them all on protecting 85% of the population of Ontario, their drinking water. Well, the other 15% are all of us rural people with private wells, and there's no protection for us. You cannot. So this is another thing that you're dealing with, so your wells get contaminated, so what? There's no provincial protection for that. And this is the attitude. The other, those two things, risk management, which deals with it, is a numbers game, and it says not enough people are going to be harmed by this because there's not enough people living in the area. And then the other thing that, because that rural areas are really now regarded as industrial zones. And this is from the city of Ottawa telling people, oh, you have a problem with the sewage being spread next to you, it's making you sick? Move into the city. That's where you have to live if you want to be safe now. The countryside is an industrial zone. You got to expect this. You don't move to the countryside for your health. You move there because you got. So what they're doing basically is they're moving people, they're putting pressure on rural people to move back into the cities, to abandon the countryside. The countryside is becoming a waste zone for industry and for anything to take place. And by doing that, the way the civil servants look at it is they're reducing the costs. We don't have to provide ambulance service and schools and roads for people. They're very expensive anyway, these people with these little farms and stuff, So much easier if we can just turn it all into wasteland, move everybody into cities. So that's all I've got to say. But that's what you're up against, and I think that this is part of a bigger picture that we all have to take a united stand to fight.
Hi, I have a quick question and a comment. Richie Allen. I'm here with a couple others. We're part of the local Council of Canadians group and provided some support for the local issues here. So my question is there anything to expect from the Wynne government of a change or no?
JB2?
Yeah, Jim Bradley 2.0. Well, I mean, that's why it's incumbent on all of us to put the pressure on the new premier and her government to do the right thing. I mean, there's likely going to be a spring election, or from what we hear, there's going to be a spring election. This needs to be an issue, not just locally or not just regionally, but it needs to be provincial. But it's up to us to make it an issue and fight for, airtime alongside all the other 110 pressing issues of the day. And that we have to basically make it an issue that is too hard for her to ignore or that she ignores at her peril. I mean, we're really talking about political accountability. That's the main mechanism for fixing the law that's broken right now for all the reasons you've heard tonight.
So there's no indication that she'd be more in favor or not? I know we've sent her a letter about the issue, but have not
Well,
heard back
I'm not
in a
sure
way.
it's gone up that far up the ladder yet. I mean, the EBR application for review that went in was decided by ministry technocrats. I'm not even sure Jim Bradley knew anything about it, but he's going to hear about it, and so will the Premier. So we just need to ratchet up the pressure and bring it upwards and make it a more government-wide thing, and we just can't focus on what some people at Approvals Branch are saying in, you know, St. Clair Avenue in Toronto.
Right. My comment was that in terms of what issue it is, and it's not an NIMBY issue, and it's not this and that, and I think there's the other large stakeholder is the land and the environment, and that I haven't heard it quite verbalized here tonight, but it's just too important an issue for us to be poisoning all our water for short-term financial gains for someone. And it's not just this province, it's across the country, it's across the world. So I think that's really one of the reasons we're so involved in it here, is to protect the water.
You know, you're absolutely right, because if I in this mediation process that we go through with the Environmental Review Tribunal, at the last meeting we had, I left there, and it was just something was just nagging at me and really bothering me about what was going on. It was there, but it just wasn't coming to front of mind. And what it finally was the fact that everybody around the table felt it. And talking earlier about the contaminant attenuation zone, everyone around that table finds it perfectly acceptable to contaminate the environment, as long as there's no human health issue. And they'll hide that human health issue for as long as they possibly can. But polluting the environment for hundreds of years, piece of cake, not a problem, right? And that, you know, at the end of the day, I just went, that is wrong. That is just plain wrong. We have got to wake up as a race and just decide that we can't let this go on any longer. It's just stupid. That we will build industrial infrastructure, waste infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, that is going to pollute the land for hundreds of years, so that land is worthless and can't be used for anything else. We may have lots of land, but it's shrinking, and it's shrinking fast because it's not going to be usable land any longer.
Can I ask a question as moderator? There are a lot of people here. The majority of people here are of a certain age, and I'm wondering about this issue of public engagement and young people being involved in getting involved in these issues at the political level, in terms of expertise, in terms of organization at the community level, and so on. I wonder what your experience has been in trying to make contact and engage young people in taking up these issues, because it is an issue for them and for the future.
In our community, we wanted to go to the schools to get them involved, to get the kids to realize that this issue was in their community. And a lot of the schools, unfortunately, they felt it was too political. And they didn't want the kids to be involved in political issues. Even though it's not, it's an environmental issue. And this is the generation that's going to have to live with the concerns of this landfill. I'm not going to have to worry about it too much longer, but they will. And so that was we were very disappointed. We actually had a contest where we were giving prizes for high school students who would produce video, not particularly the landfill issue itself, but just the whole trash and recycling issue. We got very, very few, because the schools didn't promote it. They didn't want to get involved. And so that was our concern. But it can work, because when we had to present to council back in 2007, there was one high school student who just about brought the council to its knees. She was so passionate in her talk to the councillors that if we can get the young people involved, they have a really strong role to play, but it's hard to get them involved.
Harry, you wanted to say something?
Yes, we've been to the two high schools in our community and made presentations to science groups and things. Again, they're very interested in the issues, and the teachers might do something with that. It's very hard to get them more engaged in that. At the local fair, we engage the children in looking at the types of flora and fauna that we find at these sites, and show them photographs of the butterflies and things, and why don't we have any more monarch butterflies in this region and things like that. And they're interested, but again, to go beyond that, to be able to use that, springboard that into something larger is very hard. When the terms of reference came out, they were sent to all the school boards, and the school boards looked at it and said, what's this for? What are we supposed to do with this? So the proponents sent terms of reference to the school boards, and school boards didn't know what to do. So they were expected to have some input, but they didn't even know what it was that they needed to give input to.
Mike, and then we'll go to the floor.
So similar issue. We had wanted to do things at the high schools and stuff like that, and a lot of the principals were really, really standoffish, but we were able to find science teachers. My kids have been involved since they were this high in this fight, and they both brought it to their high schools and elementary schools. They did speeches and all that stuff, and it's great. I mean, we did generate interest, and you do, but it's constant churn, right? Because they leave, they go on to university, they come back, they may not come back. I think it's instead of focusing, having the high school kids involved is very good, but really you need the 30-somethings involved. They're having kids. They're now starting to be concerned about their kids and their kids' futures. And that's the group that we've really got to try to attract. They're the busy group, so you can't overwhelm them with it, but you've got to find a way to deliver a simple message that resonates with them and their concern for their children and bring that, and that's the group. And so the way you position it with them is, we don't need you to be out there demonstrating. We don't need you to be out there working to help build the campaign. We need you to be there to be part of the campaign, writing letters, signing petitions, getting your friends to sign petitions, passing it along on Facebook or whatever the other case, and any other ways that you can engage them where it's a minimal amount of time on their part because they're so busy raising their families.
Yes, my name is Sami Assad. I live in Carp, so we're fighting against the Carp landfill expansion. The Carp landfill is, I think, is unique, but then I listened to all your stories, and maybe it's not as unique as I believed it was. The initial landfill had half a liner, and so it's leaking. There is belief that also Waste Management did add additional garbage in areas where there is that they weren't supposed to put it in, and that's leaking too, even though it's not yet proven. The neighboring sites are contaminated. Some of these sites have been purchased by Waste Management, and other sites have not. The site that Waste Management wants to put the new landfill is also contaminated. It's owned by Horizon, but right now it's an option to buy. My belief was, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, and that if you contaminate a neighboring site, you have to purchase that site and then turn it into an attenuation zone. Right now, Waste Management and the Ministry of the Environment is going to probably allow Waste Management to purchase the Horizon property, which is already contaminated, and put a landfill on it. Now, if you put a landfill on this site, then the question is, well, what's going to be the attenuation zone? And to me, it only makes sense. It's going to turn out to be into neighboring properties. I don't understand how this can move forward with the Ministry of Environment. But I have one question: is how contaminated must a neighboring property, or how contaminated must the water of a neighboring property be before it actually rings some alarm bells?
Could I?
Well, yeah, why don't we let the geologist and then Richard
Okay.
and the lawyer?
Do you don't want to hear from the engineer?
Engineer too.
I think you meant you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a geological engineer, so
He's both.
I can do both.
Both hats.
No, I was going to say that you've heard the term attenuation zone. So right now, MOE will allow landfills to leak and to maintain this attenuation zone. So attenuation zone's got to do with the monitoring wells that go around, So it pollutes. When is the pollution too much? It's if it's a drinking water well and the drinking water standards are corrupted by the leachate. So these wells are not drinking water wells, these are monitoring wells, so they can be polluted. So basically what they have to do is they have to keep buying land. This is acceptable. MOE, it's acceptable to pollute the groundwater as long as when you pollute it, you gotta buy it. Pollute it, you purchase it. And so and they said before 1980, anything that's been there since before 1980, that's an approved method of dealing with the landfill. And remember, that contamination plume or contamination is going to keep going for thousands of years because these things are not being cleaned up. The things that polluted are still there. Engineers like to cover it with clay, thinking that if you don't have the rainwater coming down, you're not going to get the leachate going out. But the fact is, there's other things in there that are happening, and those things will continue to happen for hundreds of thousands. So that's why we're concerned about the future.
So I agree with you.
Yeah.
But how contaminated must the water be for it to raise some heads and awareness on this issue?
Okay, so the reference that's normally used are the numerical standards that are set out in the Ontario Water Quality Drinking Standards. And that regulation sets out a number of, limits, and I'm sure you've read them, for a number of parameters that are associated with leachate and other sources of contaminants as well. What the ministry has in place is something called the reasonable use guideline, and you've probably heard that term lots of times. And so what happens is, if there's evidence that the leachate is moving off-site, and maybe they'll do some off-site domestic well testing, maybe they'll drill some new wells to figure out how much is there and whatever. But the reference isn't to what the standard is. Let's say the standard for a particular substance is 1 microgram per liter. That's what it's 1. What the ministry is going to be looking for on a reasonable use basis is 25% of that, because we don't want to, do nothing until we've already reached or exceeded the standard. We want to do some preventative stuff. So that's 25%. So if they found that, the material showing up in the domestic well offsite at, 0.25 micrograms per liter, that's when they need to start thinking about a contaminant attenuation zone. The problem that we're encountering at Richmond is everywhere they look, there's reasonable use exceedances. So we haven't found the outer edge of the plume yet, so we're going further and further afield and not cutting off the discharge at source. So that's the short answer.
I think the item you're looking for is the maximum allowable concentration for drinking water quality. So if one of those parameters exceeds that, is that enough to raise some
Well,
eyebrows?
actually, they're looking for less than the parameter. They're looking for a quarter of what the parameter is, what the drinking water standard is. That's all I'm going to say about
So
that.
if we find drinking water outside the limits of the landfill zone, which have exceeded these parameter levels of concentration, what are we to do?
Well, I'm not dispensing legal advice, especially in a case that I'm not involved in, especially in public. But, one of the other things I do besides environmental assessment cases is we sue polluters for that very thing. So if there's evidence of contaminants in somebody's well at or above the applicable drinking water standard, guess what my option is going to be?
But if it's somebody else's well, it's not yours.
Well, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about the landowner, the affected landowner. One of the options that he or she can consider is, do you have enough evidence to sue?
Question is, what if we prove that there's contaminants outside the landfill,
Yep.
but it's not your property? It's somebody else's?
Oh, you're talking, okay. You're not suing, because you have no status to sue with respect to somebody else's well. The only thing you can do is you might use an environmental bill of rights tool to force the ministry to issue an order to amend the approval, or otherwise require preventative measures or the extension of the CAZ.
I'll try to be brief. My name is Vincent Lavoie. I'm also involved in the Carp landfill fight since 2006, and it's been a long time. So I understand Mike. He says it's been a longer time because he's been a longer time. Feel your pain, yeah. And I feel it's strange that you said before 1990, before Mike Harris, the proponents were complaining the process was too long and it was costing them too much to run the assessment with the long hearing process and all that. The government changed it. Now the proponents has the ball, basically, and now they tire us, right? Waste management has gone through 3 tours before they finally got one approved, and 1 EA, and now we have the EA approved. And even for the duration of this EA, they were shoveling the arguments forward. We went, what's the need? Prove us that you have a need for 8 million cubic meters of landfill here. They never responded to that. We asked that to the MOE, because obviously you can't ask Waste Management. They said, no, we're a business, we're going to try to justify it. So you asked the MOE said, no, we don't have to justify that, they're going to answer you in the EA process. We went through the EA, we asked the same question. Oh, well, not right now. And during the approvals, the EA part, we asked to meet them, as Harold said, and they refused to talk to us. They wouldn't meet us. Finally, now that the EA is approved, we finally had a meeting 2 weeks ago with the local district branch, and nice people, all that, and then they say, well, we can't really do anything anymore because now it's the ACA process. So it's totally flawed and against the landowner, against the neighbor. Ottawa is going to be known as the dump capital of Canada, right? There's going to be 7 dumps in the area here. That's where we're going. It's ridiculous. You're going to have a nice big dump on the east end when you drive from Montreal. There's going to be a nice big dump on the west end when you drive in from North Bay and Ottawa. This is pretty ridiculous. And what do we do to stop it? Well, I think getting the political awareness and political engagement is the only way. I think it's hard. I'm not the political beast. I'd rather be home and quiet. I don't know how to do it, but I'm trying a little bit. But it's hard to get people engaged. We had in 2006, 2008, we had a fair bit of engagement in the west side because it stank like hell, so people rose up. So now even if you drive through Stittsville today, they say, no, it's gone, it's a dead issue, and now we're finally reviving it a little bit. Because, it's not done? It's coming back? Yes, it's coming back, because Waste Management has never given up. The current landfill, which has been closed in 2011, has a contamination lifespan of 124 years. That's the one that's there. It's been built, it's known it's going to be 124 years. Well, the new one that they're planning over the same spot, the model says is going to have a contamination lifespan of more than 320 years. Well, that's almost longer than Canada has existed. Why do we allow that? So part of the political push is to say no more landfills. And how do you do no more landfills is, you need to have a better solution at disposal, and you need to have the less need for disposal. I'm not going to go zero waste. I think that's utopia, and I'm sorry for the real ecologists, more green guys, but I think you need to reduce the need for disposal. The Ministry of Environment and the province of Ontario has goals to have 70% diversion. They do nothing to enforce it. The cities do some things to enforce it. Ottawa is doing pretty good. We're at 42, 43% now, Harold. The province at 12 or 13. Well, as long as we don't reduce, reuse, and recycle, you're going to have to make giant holes in the ground and do what we're talking about. And, so enforce the mechanism, put major fees on landfills. It's costing us a lot of money to do these landfills. We think it's the cheapest way. Well, it's not the cheapest way if it's going to pollute for 300 years. I'm sorry. And it's unfortunate that we can't get more people than that for an issue like this on a night like tonight. So thanks everybody for the effort. We're still there, we're still fighting. Talk to your neighbors, try to get them engaged. That's what we need to do, but it's a hard fight. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Butts. I'm with Mike Bossio's group, the CCCTE. I was just in Montreal a couple of weeks ago for the Waste and Recycling Expo, and I went there to see what is the future of waste, where are these companies going, what is their focus. A couple of things I learned was the incinerator in Durham is going to be started up next year. They're going to start running, it's in construction right now, they're going to start doing some test burns to test for pollutants, air pollutants. I'm not sure if that's the solution, but I want to know if anybody here could comment on the waste industry, we haven't talked about the companies and the possible coercion, corruption that exists, that I believe exists. I don't think these are waste companies. I think they're more trucking companies. I think they make money in trucking. Are the Teamsters Union a part of this inindustry? We've had people threatened in our committee. What are we fighting against? What is an incinerator going to do to the waste industry that is basically a trucking company or is looking for landfill? And how do they work? How are they communicating? I find that if you try and talk to one company, they don't answer the questions. They protect each other, even though they're different companies with different landfills. So I don't know who can make comments about this industry. And I think politically, we have to find solutions, as the last fellow just said. Give solutions. I know that one of the companies in Montreal at the Expo, they can now tear open bags and sort garbage. You don't have to hand sort at home, and they can remove 80% of the recyclables on a site. So why doesn't a company like Waste Management build these plants where they are reducing on the site? 20 years of landfill is not very long, so they're going to be looking for another site. So I don't know, I'm looking for any insight into these companies.
It's 9:15. That's a question, a very, very open question that certainly deserves a lot of discussion. And
I think the Charbonneau Commission has changed a lot of what people's thinking. I spent 2 days like Megantic, and I know it changed the line of thinking in the Ministry of Environment there. They had a huge catastrophe. And when the Charbonneau Commission came about, the trucking industry took a back step and delayed everything for us. So there may be something to all of that. I don't know. Overall, I did thank Candace for proposing. You guys are all here, and I tip my hat to all of you here. It is not your problem. It's not ours. It's our problem as a whole. And we have to move politically on this thing. And I tip my hat to all of you guys for stepping forward tonight and expressing yourselves the way you have. So my hat to you guys. Thank you very much.
I would like to ask the panelists just one last comment, and perhaps if we could focus it just a couple of sentences on how to organize, how to pull together, how to build a coalition that has more clout and more capacity to take action. Mike, do you want to start?
I think I already partially addressed this, that, yeah, I mean, an alliance is definitely the way that we have to go. It is a big job. It's a big task. I probably put 3 to 6 hours a day into this. You have to. I love where I live. I'm not going to let some big American corporation come in and destroy it. And I'm very fortunate. I mean, I've got 5 people here with me today from our group that we drove down together. I'm very fortunate that I have a really strong, committed group of individuals that feel the same way. And most of us aren't even going to be impacted by this dump. But we care. We love where we live. And I get the sense that everybody here at this table does too. And I'm not, talking from one person's experience. I'm sure all of us are putting in that kind of time. It takes that level of commitment to change people's thinking, to change the way they do things. I generate 1 to 2 bags of garbage a year, right? It's not impossible to do. You just have to decide you're going to do it. Educate, regulate, and people can't do it on their own, so you've got to help to educate them. And once again, it's getting out there, getting the message out there as far and wide as possible, in any way possible, to help people understand that this is such a serious issue. It's not something to be. We just have to decide we're going to do something about it.
Suzanne?
Sorry, I went over again. Oh, sorry, Suzanne. There you go.
I'll just
I
totally.
hog this with Suzanne all night.
I'll just totally agree with Mike that it's really all about sharing information with our communities, and that's one of the main things that Opal decided we were going to do when we formed. Is that we weren't just going to be talking to the politicians and talking to the province and talking with the proponent, is that we wanted to gather the information and share it with as many people as possible so that they understood, what was proposed to happen in their communities. So we've used social media a lot, and we have print newsletters. We try to have things in the newspaper and on the radio and in other media as often as possible. And basically, there's a lot of people that think when something like this comes in, it's a done deal and there's nothing they can do about it, and they kind of develop this defeatist attitude about it, and you sort of have to change one mind at a time, and that's just done by sharing information.
Yeah, we have to show the political people in Toronto that it's not a bunch of small groups of people. When we had our meeting with the minister, it definitely came across the table that he's concerned of how many people are upset at this issue. And his feeling was that a landfill only influences a certain number of people around it, and they're not a large number of people in terms of the provincial issues. And we have to convince them that it is. It's everybody's problem, like somebody said. It's not just the people living around it. And I think an alliance of groups is going to be much stronger than going to the minister individually or going to the premier individually. As we found out, we all have the same fight. It's all the same fight, so it's not 5 small groups or 6 small groups. It's one big group, and that's what we have to get an alliance going that has that body behind it.
This is a multi-million-dollar industry. The garbage is there. It's got to go somewhere. These guys get tipping fees for dumping it off at their site, and what's the cheapest thing for them to do? Throw it in a hole. And why are they doing it? Because they're allowed to by MOE. And so that's got to change. But also, I think one of the things we need to do is to change our own outlook and not always be against something. Let's be for something. Let's start promoting the 3 R's. Let's start to, on a grassroots level in our communities, use our influence to educate and to get people starting to think about what they're doing with their own waste as individual residences and industries and commercial operations. I think that we can play a role there too. So if we can cut them off, if you will, at the other end, the source, then we can start to bite into their impact their bottom line. And it's a big business. Waste is the new gold.
From our perspective and the whole coalition, standing together as a united front, I think there's a lot of value in there because the power of the people can make this happen. From one of the newer groups that is just embarking down this particular road, the other thing is we were very thankful to have the Russell group there to provide guidance, to help strategize, to help guide us and lead us into this unknown territory for many of us. So I find that a lot of, the new communities out of there, or anybody who's facing a similar type project, if we can band together as well and share experience, whether that's on dump busters or whoever, some kind of mechanism where they can go through. If they need help, they can have a contact and come and stand side by side with us so that we can teach them and show them, as opposed to starting over from scratch every time. To that effect, I'm just going to do a little promotion here. We do have a town hall meeting for our local community at the Carlsbad Springs Community Center tomorrow at 7 o'clock. It is an education campaign to give them a status of where we're at, what we're doing, what our next steps are, and how we need them and how they can help us in this endeavor. So if you want to get more information, you're all welcome to participate.
Richard.
I think the main lesson that I learned from the Richmond Landfill EA Round 1 is that the only reason we convinced the minister to say no to the expansion was because of the concerted, ongoing collaboration of the concerned citizens group, local landowners, the Mohawks of Bay of Quinte, and the local township. But for that really strong connection between the interested parties, there's no way we would have had success at the local level. And I see the same sort of template for success at the provincial level. The only way we're going to make any tangible improvements in our landfill approvals process and the environmental assessment process is if all the interested groups continue to work together and provide the unified front, as Sue just pointed out. There's no doubt, as I think Harry just said, the Ontario waste industry is a very powerful, very big, very well-connected lobby group. They're at Queen's Park. They have the Ontario Waste Management Association speaking for all the people who haul and burn and bury waste in this province. So we're up against, a pretty tough opponent. But on the other hand, as a lawyer, I see that, the laws that we have in place are really expressions of public policy. We can make laws, or we can tell our legislators to make laws as stringent or as weak as we care to make them. So if we want to continue to live with weak landfill laws, I guess that's a choice. But if we want to improve it, if we want to strengthen the regulatory regime that we operate under, that's the message that needs to be heard loud and clear in Queen's Park. So we have to work, at the grassroots level, regional level, provincial level. We need to make a lot of noise. I've worked closely enough with enough MOE people to know that one of the first things that the minister's staff does every morning is look at the newspapers, get the media scanned, figure out who's making noise and about what, and is the Ministry of Environment being dragged through the mud again? That's what they fear. That's what they don't like. And so, to my mind, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to make noise, we need to drum up the pressure, and we need to make things happen at Queen's Park. So I'm hoping that tonight's event is a stepping stone towards that. I hope that we'll continue to work closely with each other and reach out to other affected communities and get that unified front presented forcefully and vigorously at Queen's Park.
I'm sorry, David, can I add one quick thing to what Richard just said there? And I can't believe I forgot this, because it was the prime message I wanted to deliver tonight. And that is that our group, our primary goal is to show other groups and to show these groups that a small little rural community can take on the world's largest waste company, one of the largest governments, and hold them accountable for the decisions and actions that they take. We've done it, right? There's no reason that we can't do it again and again and again if we decide that's what we're going to do.